Have you ever had to say goodbye to someone you love? A little more. Each day, I said goodbye to my mother many times before she passed away. Not because she left, but because her memory did. Alzheimer's doesn't take a person in one moment. It unravels them piece by piece. This is our story. The long goodbye begins. It began subtly. My mother was just 50 years old, still full of energy, still the same woman who raised me with strength and grace. But little signs began to appear like tiny ripples on an otherwise calm lake. She started repeating herself. At first, it was small things, a question asked twice. In the same conversation, a story she told yesterday, now retold as if it were brand new. We laughed it off. I teased her, lovingly calling her Miss Deja Vu. But over time, it stopped being funny. She'd pause mid-sentence, trying to recall the word that used to come so easily. She'd lose her train of thought in the middle of conversations, and I could see in her eyes a flicker of confusion, a momentary fear she tried so hard to hide. Then came the anxiety. My mother, who had always been a steady ship in any storm, began to seem nervous about simple things, making dinner, going to the store, attending social gatherings. She'd call me to double-check things she'd always remembered, like my birthday or the time of a doctor's appointment. She grew quieter in conversations, less confident, more withdrawn. One evening, after misplacing her keys for the third time that day, she looked at me and asked softly, "Do you think something's wrong with me?" I smiled, trying to reassure her. "You're just tired, Mom. Or maybe it's stress. We all have off days." She nodded, but didn't look convinced. A few weeks later, she brought it up again. "Your grandma had Alzheimer's, you know, and so did Aunt Marie. I've been forgetting a lot lately. Things that just happened, they slip away so fast." I brushed it off again, though my heart tightened. She was only 54. In my mind, Alzheimer's was something that crept in during your 70s, not while you were still young and vibrant. I told her it was probably nothing. Maybe it was stress, maybe menopause, anything but that. But she was right. Looking back, I think she always knew. Even before the diagnosis, she was already beginning to say goodbye, not to us, but to pieces of herself. A forgotten appointment here, a misplaced item there, a quiet moment where her smile lingered a bit too long, trying to remember the name of someone she loved. We began to live in a space of uncertainty. Not quite sick, not quite well. Each day brought small changes, subtle shifts in routine that were easy to overlook until they weren't. And while the world around us kept spinning, our little corner of it began to slow down, gently but undeniably. This was the beginning of our long goodbye. It's hard to explain what it feels like to watch someone you love drift away in slow motion. It's not just the forgetting, it's the not knowing what will go next. Which piece of memory, which part of personality, which shared joke or song or holiday tradition might be the last. At the time, I didn't know how long or how hard this journey would be. I didn't know how much I would learn about love, about patience, about the quiet heroism of showing up day after day, even when the person you're showing up for is no longer quite themselves. But I did know one thing. I would walk beside her every step of the way. This was the beginning, the moment of fear. There is a distinct kind of silence that settles into a room when someone speaks a truth that no one wants to hear. I remember it clearly. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day meant for tea and casual conversation. My mother and I were sitting at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background, when she looked at me with eyes that seemed too still. She said, "I think I might have Alzheimer's." The words floated for a moment before they landed, and when they did, I could feel them take the air out of the room. I tried to smile, tried to keep things light, because that was what we did in our family. We smiled through worry. We softened fear with laughter. But this was different. She wasn't joking. Her voice was calm but serious, and in it, I heard not just concern, but quiet resignation. She had been watching herself change in ways that frightened her, and while I had noticed the small slips, she had felt them deeply and repeatedly in the privacy of her mind. She reminded me then that her own mother had suffered from Alzheimer's, so had all her maternal aunts. It was a dark legacy passed down silently, an unspoken fear in the background of her life. And now it had stepped into the light. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was just stress or hormones, or maybe a vitamin deficiency. I even told her how rare Alzheimer's was at her age. She was only 54. People didn't get Alzheimer's at 54. That was what I told her. That was what I needed to believe. But her eyes didn't waver. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was telling me what she already knew. That moment stayed with me. For weeks afterward, I tried to push it from my mind. I threw myself into research, looking for anything that could prove me right and her wrong. But the more I read, the more I began to see the quiet truth behind her fear. Early onset Alzheimer's was rare, but not impossible. And as I watched her more closely, I began to notice what she had probably been noticing for a long time. The repetition, the forgetfulness, the anxiety, the subtle way she was stepping back from her life, 1 inch at a time. It is a terrifying thing to suspect that something irreversible is beginning. To know that you may be entering a chapter that will take more than it gives. But even in that fear, she was calm, brave, and I believe now that she spoke up not because she wanted comfort, but because she wanted me to be ready. She gave me that gift. She let me in. And though I was still clinging to denial, she was already preparing for the road ahead. That moment of fear wasn't just about the possibility of a diagnosis. It was about two people sitting at a kitchen table, beginning to understand that life was about to change forever. It was our first step into the unknown. Diagnosis and denial. 3 years passed between that quiet conversation in our kitchen and the moment a neurologist with kind eyes and a practiced voice looked at us and confirmed what we already feared. My mother had early onset Alzheimer's disease. We were sitting in a sterile white office, the kind with pale blue chairs and outdated magazines on the coffee table. I remember the soft hum of a ceiling light and the way my mother's hand felt in mine, cool but steady. She squeezed my fingers when the doctor began to speak, as if bracing me more than herself. He said it gently, but no amount of softness could cushion the truth. Early onset Alzheimer's. The words fell into the space between us like heavy stones. My mother did not react at first. No tears, no gasp. She simply nodded, almost as if she had been waiting to hear it aloud. Then, after a long pause, she looked at me and gave me a small, sad smile. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry until I did. She had always been the strong one, the one who comforted, who carried others through their storms. But that day, she let herself be held, and I, still grappling with the finality of the diagnosis, held her tightly, trying to anchor both of us to something real. I remember asking the doctor questions, trying to fill the silence with something practical. How long do people live with early onset Alzheimer's? What treatments were available? What should we expect? He answered each question patiently, but the truth was clear. There was no cure, only management, only coping. Leaving the office, I felt like we had stepped into a different world. The same sun was shining. People passed by us, unaware, but everything felt changed. We drove home in silence, my mother gazing out the window, and I gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. For a long time after that day, I lived in denial. I went through the motions, researching resources, arranging follow-up appointments, but part of me refused to accept it. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe this would plateau. Maybe this version of her, the one who could still laugh and hold my hand and tell stories, would last longer than we thought. And for a while, it seemed possible. She was still herself in many ways. She still loved her garden, still hummed her favorite songs while folding laundry. She still remembered my face. We held on to those small signs like driftwood in a rising tide. But denial, like memory, is fragile. It cracks under the weight of repetition, of new forgettings, of missed steps and lost names. The signs became impossible to ignore. Her calendar filled with scribbles she didn't understand. She would get lost walking a familiar path. The phone calls increased often, filled with panic over things she had simply imagined. And still part of me clung to hope. Maybe if we adjusted enough, adapted fast enough, we could outpace the disease. But Alzheimer's does not slow down. It does not make room for hope unless you shape that hope into something else, into presence, into patience, into love. Looking back now, I realize denial wasn't just about refusing to see what was happening. It was my way of holding on to who my mother was, to who we were together. It was a shield I raised not just to protect myself, but to preserve a space where she could still be whole, if only in my mind. Eventually, though, I had to set that shield down. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I loved her enough to face what was coming. That day in the doctor's office was the beginning of a new kind of goodbye, one that would take years, one that would ask more of us than we thought we had to give. And still, we gave it, living around the disease. We didn't fight the disease. We learned to live around it. It may sound passive, but in truth, it was an act of love and constant adjustment. My mother, ever proud and independent, refused to let the diagnosis define her. So we adapted. She adapted. Our home transformed little by little. Post-it notes became her memory. They were everywhere like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, guiding her from room to room. Turn off the stove. Take morning pills. Call daughter at 5. Each note served as a reminder of the tasks she used to do without thinking. Now they were anchors. Her medications, once kept in a simple box, were transferred into color-coded dispensers. Monday through Sunday morning and evening, each slot became a ritual. She would sit at the kitchen table and study them like a student learning a new language. At first, she managed well. Over time, I began helping more, until eventually I was doing it all. Cooking became complicated. She forgot ingredients, steps, even how to use the oven. I started batch cooking on weekends, bringing over containers labeled by the day. It helped her maintain a sense of normalcy. She still felt like she was preparing meals, even if all she had to do was reheat. Her calendar was no longer enough. She began missing appointments, forgetting birthdays. So I made charts, daily schedules taped to the fridge with pictures, symbols, and large letters. We created a rhythm, a gentle structure for each day that could withstand the weight of her growing confusion. But more than the tools and tricks, what helped most was routine. A quiet walk every morning, listening to her favorite oldies in the afternoon, folding laundry together even if it was already folded. Familiarity gave her comfort, and comfort gave her peace. I noticed she clung to certain memories with surprising clarity. She could forget what she had for breakfast, yet recall a story from her childhood with perfect detail. I would sit and listen, not just to preserve those stories, but to preserve her. In those moments, she was still herself. There were difficult days too, days when she insisted she had to go home, even though she was standing in her own living room. Days when she became frustrated or withdrawn. And on those days, all I could do was meet her where she was. If home was a different house in her mind, then I would pretend we were just visiting. If she asked about people long gone, I would nod gently, sometimes changing the subject, sometimes simply holding her hand. We learned that love in dementia is not about correcting. It is about accepting. It is not about making her remember, but about making her feel safe. We did not fight the disease because it was not a battle we could win. Instead, we chose to walk beside it, to soften its edges, to shape our lives around its presence without letting it steal all our joy. We laughed when we could, we cried when we had to, and through it all, we stayed together. This became our new normal, a world held together by patience post-it notes and an unspoken promise that no matter how much she forgot, she would never be alone. The illusion of stability. She stayed stable for years, independent, clever, resilient. It almost felt like we had outwitted the disease, or at least found a way to live alongside it. There were signs, of course, little cracks in the surface, but overall, she still recognized us. She could hold conversations, cook simple meals, and tell stories from long ago. Her world had narrowed, but it was still familiar. In those years, we found a rhythm that worked. Mornings were our best time. She was most alert then, and we would have tea together sometimes, flipping through photo albums or walking through the garden. The flowers brought her joy. She knew the names of each bloom, even when she couldn't remember what day it was. It was in these quiet routines that I let myself believe we had reached a plateau. I knew better deep down, but the human heart clings to hope, especially when love is involved. And in the stillness of those years, I saw glimpses of the woman she had always been. Her humor, her warmth, her quiet determination. They hadn't left. Not completely. Family would visit and marvel at how well she seemed. Her conversations were simpler, yes, and sometimes repeated. But her smile was the same. Her laugh still lifted the room. It became easy to think that perhaps this was as far as the disease would go. We had learned to adapt, to make peace with the limitation. Maybe, just maybe, this was our new forever. But Alzheimer's is a patient thief. It waits, it watches, and then, without warning, it takes. The change came suddenly. One day, she couldn't find her way to the bathroom in a house she had lived in for decades. Another day, she put her slippers in the fridge and tried to heat a frozen dinner in the dryer. Her calendar, once a map of her week, became a jumble of scribbles she no longer understood. Conversations grew harder. She began to mix up names, then faces, then relationships. She looked at me one morning with a puzzled expression and asked if I knew her daughter. My heart caught in my throat. I was her daughter. The illusion shattered. The stability we had grown so used to was only temporary, a lull before the next wave. We had grown comfortable in the eye of the storm, forgetting that the winds were still circling. From that point on, everything changed. Our routines had to shift. Her care became more hands-on. The fear in her eyes returned, not constant, but enough to remind me that her mind was slipping further away. And yet, through it all, she remained gentle. She still responded to music, especially the songs of her youth. A familiar tune could bring tears to her eyes, or a tap of her foot. She still reached for my hand, still leaned her head on my shoulder. The connection was different now, but it was still there. That was the cruelest kindness of it all. Even as the disease moved forward, it left behind these fragments. Just enough to remember love, just enough to feel the loss. We had believed we were holding steady, but Alzheimer's never stands still. It only pauses long enough to make you believe it might. The sudden cliff. It happened faster than I imagined. One day, I was holding her hand as she told me the same story for the third time, and the next, I was chasing after her down a busy street because she had wandered off without remembering where she was going. There was no slow unraveling this time. It was as if something had shifted deep inside her brain, a quiet breaking that set off a chain reaction. The routines we had so carefully built began to crumble. The post-it notes lost their meaning. The labels on food containers no longer helped. Her home, once a place of familiarity and comfort, became a confusing maze of forgotten rooms and misplaced memories. She forgot how to shower, not just when, but how. I would find her standing in the bathroom, fully clothed, staring at the knobs with a look of total helplessness. She stopped using the oven completely. The counters collected dust, and the meals I had once prepared with love sat untouched. Eating became erratic. Sometimes she would forget altogether. Other times, she would eat the same thing multiple times, convinced it was her first meal of the day. The phone calls became constant. She would call me 5, 10, 15 times a day, sometimes to ask the same question, sometimes because she was scared. More than once, her neighbors called to say they had found her outside, disoriented, unable to remember which house was hers. She started withdrawing large amounts of cash from her bank account, forgetting she had done it just hours before. She had written her PIN number on the back of the card. It was no longer safe for her to live alone. And then came the day I had to make the decision, the hardest one of all. I took her to visit a care home. I told her we were seeing an old friend. She smiled, trusting me. As we walked in, I held her arm, gently guiding her through the entrance. When the door closed behind us, I knew what was coming, but she did not. I looked into her eyes and told her she wouldn't be leaving with me. She looked at me with a confusion that quickly turned to heartbreak. In that moment, she understood. She saw the finality of it, and for a brief second, so did I. I was leaving her behind in a place that felt foreign, surrounded by people decades older, in a setting that was both caring and cold. She cried, and I did too. That night, I went home alone, her empty seat beside me, echoing louder than any silence I had ever known. There is no guidebook for moments like these, no words that make it easier, no preparation that softens the blow. You only carry the weight of doing what must be done, because love in the face of disease often looks like heartbreak, often feels like betrayal, but it is still love. The sudden cliff did not mark the end of her journey, but it changed everything. It forced us into a new reality, one where my role was no longer just daughter, but guardian, protector, and voice. It was not the end, but it was the end of something. A heartbreaking decision. The day I moved her into the care home was the hardest day of my life. There are some decisions you carry with you forever, not because they were wrong, but because they were necessary. This was one of them. My mother had always been fiercely independent, the kind of woman who fixed what was broken, remembered every birthday, and never once asked for help. Watching that woman fade slowly, replaced by someone vulnerable and scared, was like mourning a loss in slow motion. I remember the morning clearly. I packed a small suitcase for her, with care her favorite sweater, a framed photo of the two of us, the quilt her mother made when she was a girl. Every item was chosen to make this new place feel less foreign, less final. As I zipped the bag closed, my hands trembled. I kept reminding myself this was for her safety, for her well-being, for love. She was cheerful on the drive over, humming along to the radio, asking me where we were going. I told her we were visiting a new place. She nodded, accepting the answer as if it were enough. Part of me wished she would resist demand more explanation, but a larger part was relieved she didn't. The care home was bright and clean, filled with soft colors and quiet voices. The staff were kind, trained in patience. They smiled at her and offered gentle welcomes. She smiled back, her manners intact, even in confusion. For a moment, I thought maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe she will adjust. But then came the goodbye. When I told her she would be staying, her face changed. Confusion turned to alarm. She looked around as if trying to find something familiar, something to anchor herself. Then she turned to me with eyes wide and childlike and asked, "Are you leaving me here?" There are no words for the pain of that question. I knelt beside her and held her hands, explaining gently that this place would help keep her safe, that people here would take care of her. She shook her head. I could see the fear rise in her, and with it a sadness that cut through me deeper than any argument could have. Still, I had to stand up. I had to walk away, and she watched me go. I cried the entire drive home, the kind of crying that comes from the center of your being, the kind that no music, no distraction, no reasoning can quiet. In the weeks that followed, guilt became my constant companion. Even though I visited her often, even though I brought her favorite snacks and read to her in the garden, it never felt like enough. I replayed that goodbye in my head at night, wishing I had done something differently, wishing there was another way. But as time passed, I saw small signs that maybe I had done the right thing. She was safer. She ate regularly. Her days had structure, and the staff came to know her, to love her in their own way. She was no longer wandering the streets or forgetting to eat. She was where she needed to be. Still, it did not stop the ache. A heartbreaking decision does not become easier just because it was right. It only becomes a part of you woven into the story you carry. And while I will always wish she could have stayed in the home she loved, I know she would have wanted me to protect her when she could no longer protect herself. That was the promise I made long ago, and that was the promise I kept. The unknown horrors of Alzheimer's. Nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Up until that point, I had thought I understood Alzheimer's. I believed it was mainly about memory loss, forgetting names, misplacing things, losing track of time. I knew it was cruel. I knew it was heartbreaking, but I did not know how deeply it could erode the very core of a person. My mother, once vibrant and full of expression, began to fade in more ways than I thought possible. It started with language. She could no longer find the words for the simplest things. Cup became that thing. Her sentences trailed off midway, and she would look at me lost in thought, as if the words were on the tip of her tongue, but could never quite surface. Eventually, she stopped trying to speak altogether. Then came the hallucinations. She would crawl under tables in search of people who were not there. She would whisper to shadows, argue with invisible guests. She told me once there were strangers in her room trying to take her things. I sat with her, held her hand, and whispered that she was safe. But no amount of reassurance could calm the fear that took hold in those moments. Her world had become a place I could not enter. She began wandering inside the facility. At all hours, day or night, she would walk in circles, pushing open every door she could find. The staff placed her in soft shoes so she would not slip. They gently guided her, always with patience. But nothing could stop the motion. It was as if she was searching for something or someone she could no longer name. As her body slowed, the toll grew more physical. She forgot how to walk. Her muscles weakened. She stopped feeding herself. At first, I brought her food and tried to coax her into eating. Later, the nurses had to feed her spoon by spoon. She forgot how to chew. Then she forgot how to swallow. Watching that decline broke something in me. I was helpless. I had always been able to help her, to fix things, to be her anchor. But now, all I could do was sit beside her and watch as the disease stripped away her autonomy, her dignity, her voice. I held on to small moments, the way her hand would still squeeze mine, the way she sometimes hummed a tune with no words. Even as everything else slipped away, there were fragments of her that remained fragile and fleeting like a whisper on the wind. I used to think Alzheimer's was mostly about memory. I learned it is about identity. It is about watching someone you love become someone you no longer recognize, while still loving them with every part of your being. It is about witnessing pain that cannot be described and still choosing to show up every day with compassion. These are the horrors people do not often speak about. The loss of movement, the fear, the silence, the quiet death that comes long before the final breath. But through it all, I never stopped seeing her. She was not just a shell. She was still my mother. In her silence, in her confusion, in her trembling hands, she was still there. And I loved her, not in spite of what she had become, but because of it. Because she was still trying, still enduring, still holding on. And so was I. Words for the caregivers. To those walking the long road of caregiving, especially for someone with Alzheimer's. This is for you, whether you are a spouse, a child, a friend, or a neighbor. Your presence matters more than you may ever fully understand. There were days I felt like I was losing myself, caught between work and visits, between planning meals and managing medications, between trying to remember who I was before all of this began. Caregiving has a way of making your world smaller. You learn to live around routines, doctor's appointments, and the unpredictable rhythms of memory loss. I often felt invisible. People asked how my mother was doing, rarely how I was. And when they did, I smiled and said, "We are managing." But inside, I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained from watching the person I loved disappear by degrees. To be a caregiver is to live in contradiction. You grieve while they are still alive. You hope for stability while bracing for decline. You celebrate a smile, a glance of recognition, as though it were gold. And you feel guilty for wishing for rest, for feeling resentment, for wondering how much longer. But here is what I want to tell you. From one caregiver to another, you are doing enough. You may not always feel patient. You may not always know the right thing to say or do. But your presence, your voice, your hand on theirs, it matters. It anchors them. It reminds them, even if they do not remember your name, that they are not alone. I learned to cherish small victories, a calm day, a shared laugh, a peaceful nap. I learned to let go of perfection and embrace presence. Some days, all I could do was sit beside her and breathe, and that was enough. There is no handbook that can teach you how to walk through this, no manual that prepares you for the ache of losing someone slowly. But what I know now is this love in its truest form is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is holding a hand in silence. Sometimes it is simply staying. So to the caregivers who are staying, who are showing up day after day with tired hearts and unwavering love, you are seen, you are appreciated, and you are not alone. In the end, it was not my strength that carried me through. It was love. It was the memory of who she was, and the belief that even as the disease stole so much, it could not take that from us. You are not just caring for someone else. You are bearing witness to love in its most enduring form, and that is something truly sacred. Words for the caregivers. To those walking the long road of caregiving, especially for someone with Alzheimer's, this is for you. Whether you are a spouse, a child, a friend, or a neighbor, your presence matters more than you may ever fully understand. There were days I felt like I was losing myself, caught between work and visits, between planning meals and managing medications, between trying to remember who I was before all of this began. Caregiving has a way of making your world smaller. You learn to live around routines, doctor's appointments, and the unpredictable rhythms of memory loss. I often felt invisible. People asked how my mother was doing, rarely how I was. And when they did, I smiled and said, "We are managing." But inside, I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally drained from watching the person I loved disappear by degrees. To be a caregiver is to live in contradiction. You grieve while they are still alive. You hope for stability while bracing for decline. You celebrate a smile, a glance of recognition, as though it were gold, and you feel guilty for wishing for rest, for feeling resentment, for wondering how much longer. But here's what I want to tell you. From one caregiver to another, you are doing enough. You may not always feel patient. You may not always know the right thing to say or do, but your presence, your voice, your hand on theirs, it matters. It anchors them. It reminds them, even if they do not remember your name, that they are not alone. I learned to cherish small victories. A calm day, a shared laugh, a peaceful nap. I learned to let go of perfection and embrace presence. Some days, all I could do was sit beside her and breathe, and that was enough. There is no handbook that can teach you how to walk through this. No manual that prepares you for the ache of losing someone slowly. But what I know now is this love in its truest form is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is holding a hand in silence. Sometimes it is simply staying. So, to the caregivers who are staying, who are showing up day after day with tired hearts and unwavering love, you are seen, you are appreciated, and you are not alone. In the end, it was not my strength that carried me through. It was love. It was the memory of who she was, and the belief that even as the disease stole so much, it could not take that from us. You are not just caring for someone else. You are bearing witness to love in its most enduring form, and that is something truly sacred. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may be walking a similar road. No one should have to carry this kind of love and grief alone. Subscribe for more stories that honor caregiving resilience and the quiet strength of families facing memory loss. Leave a comment if you've been through something similar, or simply to say hello. I read every message, and your voice matters. Together, we can raise awareness. We can break the silence around Alzheimer's, and we can remind each other that even when memory fades, love remains. You are not alone, and neither am I.